I want to get everybody's take on the convention. Senator, I turn to you first.
I think it was, for me, bittersweet because we thought we were going to elect a woman in 2016. That didn't happen. But that woman stepped up to the plate and hit it out of the park and passed that torch. Everybody talked about Biden passing a torch. Guess what? Hillary passed the torch to a new generation of women leaders. And it was exciting to see it. She was eloquent. I thought she gave an incredible speech. And it was a moment, I think, that will go down in history as we look at women politicians and women leaders.
John, what do you think?
Yeah, speaking of women leaders, I was fascinated at the response, the warm reception, the overwhelmingly warm reception to former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who herself passed a torch to Hakeem Jeffries, now the House Minority Leader, just a couple of years ago. There was some question after she basically pushed Biden out of the race what the response was going to be from these delegates, and they loved her. Her speech was not the most thrilling of the group, but she did prove herself once again, both the godmother of the Democratic Party and also the godfather.
Exactly. She was the godmother and godfather. VP Harris's speech was her chance to introduce herself to the country and explain to voters why they should choose her. We only know her as the VP. Molly, do you think people can now see her as president?
Yeah, and in fact, I think there were a lot of intentional things that were done to present her as president. Like, she stood between two flags, and her speech had a lot of these kind of State of the Union-like qualities to it. I also thought that what she did that was really smart was that she really made that, Democrats, and this is a larger theme of the convention, there are a lot of things that Republicans have abandoned with Trumpism, and Democrats have sort of picked them up, right? Patriotism, football, the case that these are proud Americans, right? And you saw a lot of these themes, but I thought that largely her speech was really prosecuting this case yet again. And she said, there was this great line where she said, I represent the people, right? I am for the people. And I thought that was really important.
Tremaine, diversity is a main tenet of the Democratic Party. But when we saw VP Harris speak last night, she made no mention of the fact that she would be the first woman president. That had to be by design. What do you think of the fact that she didn't say anything about it?
Well, I think she came ready for business, and she comported herself that way. But when you look at the audience and you see who was in attendance, I couldn't help but think about my favorite poet, Langston Hughes, who had a poem, I Too Sing America, a retort to Walt Whitman's I Hear America Singing. And that reclaiming of patriotism, that reclaiming of what it means to be an American. And we talked a lot about the idea of passing that torch and the Obamas kind of being a bridge between the Pelosi's and the Clintons and the Bidens to see a Wes Moore, to see Jasmine Crockett from Texas doing their thing, the DJs, the roll call. She didn't need to project any sense of history being claimed or reclaimed. It was evident every step of the way. And to see that many American flags, for a long time, the American flag has become synonymous with something other than this embrace. It became something similar to not to say the Confederate flag, but for many people, a scary symbol. But to reclaim that flag and to have that lineup of people there, I think that said everything that we need to know about this idea of what this moment means, especially for a diversifying America.
Molly, Republicans like to say everything is about DEI, DEI. So do you think it was by design that she made no mention of the fact that she'd be the first female president, the first black female president? Because that is a top thing they'll be talking about.
Well, she didn't have to say it, because when you're walking around those halls, those women and the delegates they felt it. And I got so many of these women coming over to me, and it was palpable. They didn't need to say it. She just was doing it. And that, I think, is the real change from, Hillary Clinton that was a path that Hillary Clinton cut. And we now see women do this. And so she didn't need to say it. She just was there. But you saw just an infectious enthusiasm among the delegates and the women volunteering. And it was just, that was really moving and exciting.
Heidi, I know you're going to have a response to this. In the Wall Street Journal, Peggy Noonan wrote that Democrats stole the idea of faith and patriotism, which are traditionally Republican themes. You think they stole them?
I didn't know that faith and patriotism were Republican. I think they stole
for sale.
that from us. Many, yeah. You know, if you think about it, Steph, you know, they have painted us as unpatriotic, as not caring about our faith. And that's never been true. And this convention hopefully stopped that. And we should all thank Adam Kinzinger, because when he stood up and he said, guess what? I'm a Republican. I now know Democrats, and they're very patriotic. And you see it over and over again through service in the country, in the military. But, you know, I think to suggest that we stole it from the Republicans, you know, is that something that they own? They don't own the flag. They don't own patriotism. And they certainly don't own my church. And so, too bad.
Heidi, what is your take on the VP candidate, Tim Walz? Freedom, family, and football. Those were certainly his themes Wednesday night.
Well, I suppose they're going to accuse us of taking football. Let me tell you, you know, I've been a very strong advocate for Tim Walz, because I believe that one of the reasons why we haven't been successful in the Democratic Party becoming a majority party is because we've ignored rural America. And I know they think they raised this issue with J.D. Vance. He hasn't lived in rural America since he was 18. This is a guy who taught in a high school, small high school. This is a guy who coached football. When he is presented to the American public, he's the most popular in terms of favorability of the four people on the presidential ticket. I think he was an excellent choice.
John, how much is Tim Walz and his whole persona making Republicans unravel? Because the most damning thing they could say about him this week is that he lied. He was not a football coach. He was an assistant football coach. Maybe only like defensive coordinator.
I mean, I don't know. That's like saying somebody wasn't a broadcaster; they were just on TV, right? Like, I mean, it's ridiculous. I think they are generally worried about the enthusiasm, the excitement the Democrats have for their ticket. I don't think it's limited to Tim Walz. I think they look at Kamala Harris and they say, "This is scary." Donald Trump thinks she is scary. Part of the reason is connected to why she didn't talk about becoming the first woman president, which is, there's no imagination gap here. You can look at her standing there in front of the Democratic convention. You can look at her standing in front of a podium as vice president or in national security meetings when you see the pictures come out of there. There's no imagination gap between Kamala Harris and the presidency. And that is something that is different in my lifetime, in your lifetime, in Tremaine's lifetime, in Senator Heitkamp's and in Molly's lifetime. There's no difficulty looking at a candidate who happens to be a woman, who happens to be black, and saying to yourself, that person could be in the presidency. And with Kamala Harris specifically, she carries herself with such dignity and poise, that I think that's double the case.
Senator, going back to patriotism, there were so many chants of USA, USA. If you turned down the volume and squinted real close, you might have thought you were at the RNC. Right. And we are seeing VP Harris present this unified party, but we're hearing a real centrist presentation. Do you think her policies follow?
I absolutely think her policies are pro-family. pro-middle class. Now, you can call that progressive, you can call it liberal, you can call it conservative, but the difference really is how we believe government should intervene. You know, I always say the difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party is the Republican Party believes in investing in institutions, and the Democratic Party invests your tax dollars in human beings and Americans and expect that that's going to make the country stronger. And that's what you see in her policies. You know, it is incredible. And Steph, if I can just make this point really quickly, I think there was all this anticipation about how the convention delegates would respond. I think the moment that the Jewish parents showed up, whose son is currently hostage in Gaza, that parent said, I thought it would be at best neutral and hostile. And when she heard the crowd chanting, bring them home, she just fell. I mean, she, you know, and with just such an appreciation that we aren't what you think we are. And that's the really great thing about this convention. It showed the Democratic Party of compassion, action, joyfulness, and yes, patriotism and faith.